"I'll work till my hands bleed," she promised. But the widowed rancher asked, "Can you be a mother?" Dry Creek, Wyoming Territory, winter 1872. The small settlement throbbed with the raw sounds of lively tunes and subdued chuckles drifting out from the dimly lit saloon. Flickering lantern glow shimmered softly against the ice-encrusted panes, casting warm hues into the frigid night as the roadways stretched out slippery under layers of fresh snowfall and deepening gloom. Restless horses pawed at the frozen ground, their hooves crunching against the ice, while plumes of their warm exhalations twisted like ghostly vapors into the inky blackness overhead. Mary dashed desperately through the howling tempest, her boots slipping on the treacherous paths, the wind whipping at her face with biting ferocity. Her wedding dress, once a pristine shade of white, was now ripped and drenched from the relentless downpour. Adhering closely to her shaking body, the lace sleeves ripped, the hem muddied, her veil lost in the street. Snow stuck to her hair, mingling with sweat and tears. Behind her came the voices. "Mary, get back here!" her father roared, sharp with fury. Another followed, deeper, crueler, the man she had been forced to marry only hours earlier. "You think you can run from me? You are mine, girl!" Mary stumbled, but did not stop. The saloon's music faded. The shouts thinned until only the wind's howl remained as she fled beyond the edge of town. The open land stretched before her like a frozen sea. She had no horse, no cloak, nothing but desperate will. Her feet slipped on ice, her lungs burned with every breath, but she pressed forward. Snow thickened. The night grew darker. More than once her legs gave out, but she forced herself up, clutching her skirts. She would rather die in the storm than be dragged back to that man's house. At last, a fence, rough posts half buried in snow, stretched into the dark. Beyond them rose a cabin, sturdy against the storm, a faint light flickering in its window. Mary collapsed at the gate, knees striking frozen ground, hands clutching the wood. Her breath came in ragged sobs, white clouds breaking into the night. The cabin door opened. A man stepped out, lantern in hand, broad-shouldered, tall, his coat worn but strong against the cold, dark hair frosted, jaw rough with stubble. He moved with the calm of men who had seen too much violence. Jonathan, once a feared bounty hunter, now a widowed rancher, seeking quiet on his land. He raised the lantern, eyes narrowing at the sight of a woman in a ruined dress, kneeling at his gate. Mary lifted her head, tears streaking her cheeks, her lips cracked from the cold, words barely forming. "Please," she whispered, then louder, breaking against the wind. "I'll work till my hands bleed. Just don't send me back!" Her fingers clawed at the snow. Her body trembled violently, not only from the storm, but from terror. Jonathan said nothing. He studied her the way a man studied the horizon before a fight. Calm, guarded, searching for threat. Faint shouts carried on the wind. Someone was hunting her. His eyes fell to the torn lace, the mud-stained hem, the bruises circling her wrists. "Get up," he said at last, his tone flat, hard as stone. Mary flinched, tried to rise, but collapsed back into the snow. "I cannot," she whispered. Jonathan stepped closer, lantern casting sharp light across her face. Her eyes lifted to his blue, burning with a desperate plea, the plea of someone with nothing left to lose. The storm howled between them. Jonathan's gaze lingered, cool and unreadable. His voice was steady, neither kind nor cruel, yet in his eyes the faintest pause. He saw it. The raw determination in her despair. The will that had carried her through the storm, when many would have surrendered to death. The lantern flame flickered. His breath rose white in the air. And though his face stayed hard, something in his gaze softened just for a heartbeat as he looked at her. This runaway bride who had chosen snow over chains. Jonathan led her inside. The cabin was plain but solid, built from thick pine logs darkened by years of smoke. The air smelled of wood fire and leather warmer than the storm outside. A rifle rested on hooks above the door, and a pair of boots sat neatly by the hearth. It was not a rich man's home, but it was a fortress compared to the snow. Mary stood trembling in the entry, dripping meltwater onto the wooden floorboards. Her ruined wedding dress clung to her like a second skin. She hugged her arms around herself, unsure whether she had escaped danger or walked into another man's judgment. Jonathan set the lantern on the table. His movements were steady, deliberate, as though nothing surprised him anymore. He shut the door against the wind, then turned to her with the same unreadable expression. "You can stay tonight," he said. "But I do not need another mouth to feed. This house runs on work, and I already do most of it myself." Mary swallowed, her voice cracked. "I told you, I'll work until my hands bleed. I will cook. I will clean. I will do whatever you ask." Jonathan's gaze hardened. "A house does not only need sweeping, miss. A boy needs raising, and my boy needs more than chores and hot meals." From the corner, a sound broke the silence. Mary turned. A little boy stood in the shadow of the doorway to the next room, barefoot, tousled-haired, eyes sharp with suspicion. He could not have been more than 6, but he looked at her with a guarded stare far older than his years. "Daniel," Jonathan said quietly. The boy's eyes did not leave Mary. "Who is she?" he asked. Mary's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but Jonathan answered first. "A stranger who came out of the storm." Daniel frowned, his small fists balled at his sides. Then, without a word, had disappeared back into the dark. Jonathan looked at Mary again. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried weight, low and deliberate. "My boy has not had a mother for 2 years. He does not need a servant. He does not need pity. He needs someone who can be a mother to him." Mary froze. The words struck harder than the storm outside. "Oh, mother." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She could not even imagine herself as such a thing. She had run from one prison only to fall to her knees at the gate of another. And yet, what choice did she have? Behind her was a man who would drag her back into chains. Ahead of her was this man, cold but steady, offering a place if she could meet his condition. Her hands shook. She lowered her gaze. "I will try," she whispered, then stronger. "I will be what he needs." Jonathan studied her for a long, silent moment. Then, without reply, he turned to the hearth. He lifted a small iron pot from the fire and ladled steaming broth into a bowl. He set it on the table with a dull thud, then placed a spoon beside it. He said nothing, offered no comfort, made no gesture of softness. But the act itself, the simple, wordless placing of a hot meal before her, was something Mary had not known in years. Her lips trembled as she sank into the chair, the heat of the bowl warming her frozen fingers. She dared a glance at Jonathan. He was already turning away, busying himself with the fire, pretending not to notice her tears. And yet she knew he had noticed. Morning came, sharp and cold, light spilling pale across frosted fields. Mary rose early, weary from the storm, but determined. On the chair by the hearth lay a rough cotton dress, plain patched, but warmer than the ruined silk she had worn. Jonathan must have left it. She dressed quickly, tied her hair back, and set to work. The kitchen smelled of smoke and old bread. She stoked the fire, swept the floor, boiled water for coffee. By the time Jonathan came in from the barn, she had laid out biscuits and eggs, her hands raw but steady. "Trying to earn your place already," he remarked, voice neutral. Mary nodded. "It is all I know," but not all in the house welcomed her. Daniel sat at the table, small elbows on the wood, eyes narrowed at her every move. When she placed a plate before him, he scowled. "I do not want it." Mary forced a smile. "It will help you grow strong." He shoved the plate away. "You are not my mother." The words stung sharper than the cold outside, but she busied herself with the dishes. Jonathan said nothing, though tension flickered in his eyes. The days stretched long. Mary hauled water, swept, fed the chickens, fumbled with saddles until her fingers learned the knots. She did all she could to prove her worth, but Daniel fought her at every step. One morning she found her shoes missing from the porch. After searching in the frost, she discovered them hanging by their laces from a fence post. Her fingers ached as she pulled them down. Daniel smirking from the barn's corner. Another night, she found a mouse scurrying across her room, trapped in a wooden box Daniel had left. She pressed her lips tight, refusing him the satisfaction of a scream. Still, she carried on. Jonathan noticed. He said little, but sometimes returning from the fields, he paused in the doorway, watching her sweep or mend. His silence spoke more than words. Then came the afternoon Daniel pushed too far. Mary had just finished hanging laundry when the barn doors creaked. She turned to see Daniel tugging at a horse's rez, leading the restless animal into the pasture. "Danielle!" she cried, running after him. The boy glanced back, mischief glinting. "If you want to be my mother, you have to catch me." He kicked at the horse's side. The animal jolted forward, nearly dragging him off his feet. Daniel clung tight, laughter breaking from his lips as the horse pulled him farther into the snowy field. Mary's heart thundered. She ran, skirts lifted, breath ragged, feet slipping on ice ahead. The ground sloped toward a ravine. Daniel stopped, but he either did not hear or did not care. The horse stumbled. Daniel yanked the reins too hard, and in a flash he was tumbling, rolling dangerously close to the edge. Mary did not think. She threw herself forward, knees striking frozen earth, tearing through cloth and skin. Crawling, she grabbed his coat just before he slid farther. She caught him with all her strength. She dragged him back from the ledge, sobbing, her hands bleeding from rocks. Daniel clung to her arms, his defiance drowned in shock. When she pulled him upright, he was pale, trembling. For the first time, he did not resist her hold. Jonathan's voice broke through the wind. "Mary." He came running, rifles slung at his shoulder, boots pounding the earth. Hyzes swept the scene. The boy shaking in Mary's arms, her knees bloodied. Theravine yawning near. Jonathan's jaw tightened. For a moment, his cold exterior cracked, and something new flickered in his gaze. Respect. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, steadying him. Then his eyes met Mary's. She expected reprimand, perhaps anger. Instead, he only nodded once, his voice low but certain. "You saved him." Mary lowered her head, breath uneven. "I would do it again." For the first time since her arrival, Jonathan did not look at her as a stranger. He looked at her as something more. The days after the ravine incident passed more quietly. Daniel did not stop testing Mary altogether, but his tricks softened. His scowls lacked their old bite, and sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he would glance at her with a trace of curiosity rather than disdain. It was in the evenings, however, that the change began to take root. One night, after supper was cleared and the fire burned low, Mary noticed Daniel lingering near the hearth. He sat cross-legged on the rug, his small hands playing with a carved wooden horse. His lashes drooped, but stubbornness kept him awake. Mary hesitated. Then, with a breath, she sat beside him. "Would you like to hear a story?" she asked softly. Daniel shrugged, pretending not to care. "Stories are for babies." Mary smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I am a baby, because I love them." She began without waiting for permission. Her voice was gentle, carrying the rhythm of her mother's lullabies long ago. Tales of foxes outsmarting wolves, of maidens who outwitted cruel kings, of brave little boys who tamed wild horses. Daniel lay down, still clutching the wooden horse. His eyes fluttered shut, though every soften his lips twitched at the clever turns of her tale. He pretended to sleep, but his breaths were too uneven, betraying his listening. Mary's heart ached. She watched his small body curled against the rug. The lines of defiance smoothed away in the glow of firelight. She remembered the child she once was, hungry for kindness, desperate for someone to tell her she mattered. When her story ended, silence filled the room. Daniel stirred, rolling onto his side, and without thought nestled against her shoulder. Her breath caught. Slowly, carefully, she let her arm curl around him. He mumbled something in his sleep. Words muffled against her dress. She leaned closer, straining to catch them. The sound was broken, half a dream, but it pierced through her chest like an arrow. Her throat tightened. Tears burned her eyes, but she held them back, clutching him a little closer. A floorboard creaked. Mary looked up to see Jonathan in the doorway, his frame cast in shadow, his expression unreadable at first. He did not speak, did not interrupt. His eyes lingered on the sight of his boy asleep against her shoulder, the wooden horse still clutched in his hand. Slowly, Jonathan crossed the room. His steps were careful, deliberate. He took a quilt from the chair and bent, draping it gently over both of them. Mary looked up at him, startled. But his eyes met hers with a softness she had not seen before. For a heartbeat, the coldness fell away. He seemed almost younger, less burdened, as though in this quiet moment he could breathe again. "Keep him warm," he murmured, his voice low, almost tender. Then he straightened and turned away, retreating into the shadows of the hall. Mary remained frozen, her cheek resting against Daniel's hair, the quilt heavy across her shoulders. She listened to the boy's steady breathing, felt the weight of his small hand against her arm. When at last she laid him carefully in his bed and tucked the covers around him, she lingered a moment longer, brushing his hair from his forehead. Only when she returned to the kitchen alone did the tears come. She sank into chair, her hands covering her face. For years she had been treated as a burden, an object to be bartered away. But here, in this quiet cabin, a child had whispered "Ma" against her heart, and a man had covered her with a quilt as though she belonged. Her tears fell silently, but for the first time they were not born of despair. They were the fragile beginning of hope. Word traveled fast in the frontier. By spring, the whispers had begun. At the trading post in town, men muttered over whiskey about a runaway bride. Some claimed she had stolen money, others that she had cursed her own husband and fled into the storm. The truth mattered little. Rumor was enough, and rumor always found the ears of the man who had lost her. Mary felt the change in the air before she ever heard the words. The way strangers' eyes lingered too long at the market, the wire rider slowed near the ranch fence before spurring off. She knew the reach of her father and the cruelty of the man she had left behind. One evening, while Jonathan mended tack by the fire, Mary stood with her hands gripping the back of a chair, her voice tight. "I should go." Jonathan looked up. "Go, they are searching. It is only a matter of time before they come here. If they find me under your roof, you will suffer for it. Daniel will suffer." Jonathan's gaze held hers steady as iron. "You're safe here?" Mary shook her head, fears sharp in her eyes. "You do not know him." "I know men like him," Jonathan said simply, "and I know how to handle them." His certainty silenced her, but the unease never left. That night, as clouds rolled heavy across the sky, danger came. The first sound was the crack of wood, a barn door forced open, horses shrieked, hooves pounding against stalls. Then came the voices, the shuffle of boots. Jonathan was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "Stay with Daniel," he ordered before striding into the dark. But Daniel, woken by the noise, darted past Mary, his small legs carrying him toward the yard. "Daniel!" Mary cried, chasing after him. In the yard, lanterns swung wild in the hands of intruders. Two men wrestled with reins, trying to drive the ranch horses out into the night. Another grabbed for Daniel, rough fingers closing on the boy's arm. "No!" Mary screamed. She hurled herself forward, colliding with the man and knocking Daniel free. They both tumbled into the mud, the boy scrambling under her as she shielded him with her body. A fist caught her shoulder, pain exploding, but she clung to Daniel, wrapping herself around him like armor. "Run!" she gasped, though she knew he could not outrun grown men. The attacker raised his knife. A gunshot split the night. The man staggered back, clutching his chest, and fell hard into the dirt. Jonathan stood in the shadows near the porch, rifle braced against his shoulder, smoke curling from the barrel. His voice thundered across the yard. "Leave now!" The remaining men faltered, one cursed, dragging the others away, mounts thundering into the dark. The barn echoed with frightened horses, but no more intruders. Mary still crouched in the mud, arms tight around Daniel. Her body shook from the blow, from fear, from the knowledge of how close death had come. Jonathan strode to them, his face carved from stone, but his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. He reached down, hauling both mother and child, no woman and boy, back onto their feet. Mary winced at the pain in her shoulder, but her first thought was Daniel. She looked down, brushing mud from his face, searching for injury. The boy's small hands clutched her dress, his chest heaved with sobs. "Mama!" he cried, voice broken, desperate. "Mama!" The word tore through her for the first time. It was not half-dreamed, not whispered in sleep. It was real. Mary's throat closed. She held him tighter, rocking him as his sobs subsided against her shoulder. Jonathan watched, silent, the rifle still in his hand. His eyes lingered on the sight of his son, clinging to Mary, calling her by the name he had not spoken since his real mother's passing. Something shifted in that moment, deep and unspoken. Danger had come and nearly taken everything, but in its wake, something new had been forged, bonded not by blood, but by sacrifice. The house was quiet after the attack. The barn was secured, the frightened horses calmed, and Daniel finally slept. his small hands clutching the quilt as though afraid it might vanish. Mary sat at the kitchen table, her sleeve torn, blood streaking her shoulder where the knife had grazed her. Her body ached, but she kept her back straight, unwilling to show weakness. Still her hands trembled faintly against the wood. Jonathan came in from the cold rifle set aside. His shirt was damp with sweat, his jaw tight. He poured water into a basin, fetched a strip of cloth, and set them on the table. "Let me see," he said. Mary shook her head. "It is nothing." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "It is not nothing." His tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, she turned her shoulder. The cut was shallow but raw, bleeding slowly. He dipped the cloth, wrung it out, and pressed it carefully against the wound. Mary hissed at the sting. Jonathan's hand faltered. "I'm sorry." His voice was rougher than she had ever heard. She looked up, startled. The man, who had faced down armed thieves without flinching, now trembled while cleaning a scratch. His calloused fingers shook as they brushed her skin. He bound the cloth around her shoulder, deliberate and slow. His eyes never lingered on hers, fixed instead on the bandage, as though it were the most important task in the world. Yet beneath his restraint lay something else, something that made her chest tighten. When he finished, his knuckles grazed her collarbone as he tied the knot. Then his gaze finally lifted. "You should have run," he said quietly. Mary met his eyes and left Daniel to them. "Never!" His jaw tightened. For a long moment they stared at each other, the air thick between them. Mary looked away first. She could not let her heart race like this. Not for him, not after everything. But in the days that followed, the distance between them narrowed. They sat together by the fire on long nights, silence no longer uncomfortable. Jonathan began to share fragments of his past. Not the blood-soaked tales of bounty hunting, but the softer memories. How his wife used to sing while kneading bread. How Daniel had inherited her smile. How fever had taken her in a single cruel week, leaving him to bury her on the hill above the orchard. "She was the only softness I had," he admitted one night, voice barely above a whisper. "When she died, I swore I would not risk loving anything that could be taken again." Mary's chest ached. She wanted to reach for him, but her hands stayed folded in her lap. Later, when he asked about her past, she hesitated. Shame rose like a tide, but his steady gaze compelled her to speak. She told him of the marriage forced upon her, the cruelty of the man she fled, the father who had bartered her like cattle. Her voice cracked as she confessed the fear that had driven her into the snow. When she finished, silence hung heavy. She braced for judgment. Instead, Jonathan leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "You were not wrong to run. No one belongs to a man like that." Tears stung her eyes. She turned her face away, but he reached out only briefly, resting his hand on hers before pulling back. The warmth lingered long after. That night, Mary lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, her mind racing. She had begun to see him not only as her protector, not only as Daniel's father, but as a man, scarred and yet capable of a gentleness she had never known. And she feared it, feared what her heart wanted, feared what her past might destroy if she reached too far. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his hands trembling as they bound her wound, and the fear was tangled with something deeper, something she could no longer ignore. The sun dipped low over the plains, painting the sky in crimson and gold. Mary was gathering laundry from the line when she heard it. Hooves, many of them, pounding hard against the earth. Dust rose on the horizon. Her breath caught. She knew before she saw them. Riders approached, led by the man she had fled, her husband in name only, rage carved into his face. Beside him rode her father, lips pressed in a cruel line. Behind them, 4 men carried rifles across their saddles. Mary dropped the basket. "Jonathan!" He was already at the door, rifle in hand. His eyes flicked to Daniel, frozen on the porch. "Inside now." Mary pulled the boy back into the house. Jonathan stepped out, shutting the door firmly behind him. The riders slowed, circling into the yard. The leader sneered, eyes locking on Mary through the window. "There she is!" he barked. "My wife. You think you can hide her here?" Jonathan's voice was steady. "She is not your wife," the man spat. "By God-in-law, she's mine, and I'll have her back." Jonathan raised his rifle. "You'll have to go through me." Tension coiled in there like a rattlesnake. The hired men shifted, fingers brushing triggers. Mary's heart hammered. Then it broke. Gunfire roared across the valley. Jonathan fired first, dropping a rider. Another shot grazed his arm, blood streaking his sleeve, but he did not falter. He chambered another round, teeth clenched. Mary cried out, pressing Daniel's head to her chest to shield him from the noise. Outside, dust and smoke filled the yard. Two riders wheeled their horses, retreating under Jonathan's relentless aim. Gunpowder stung the air, hoofprints tearing the ground. Jonathan's shoulder burned, blood soaking his shirt, but his stance never wavered. His voice cut through the smoke. "She does not belong to you." For a moment, silence held. Mary felt something ignite inside her, a fire long buried. She could not hide behind walls any longer. She shoved the door open and stepped into the yard, standing tall despite the terror in her bones. Her father's eyes snapped to her cold. "Mary, you will come home now," her so-called husband sneered. "You think you can run forever? You were bought and paid for." Mary's voice rose, stronger than she thought possible. "I am not your property." "I belong to no man!" The words rang out, silencing even the horses. Doubt flickered across the riders' faces. A murmur swelled beyond the fence. Neighbors had gathered, drawn by the shots. Farmers, ranch hands, townfolk faces lined the road, their eyes fixed on the standoff. "She's right," someone called. "Leave her be! She doesn't belong to you," another shouted. The tide turned. The intruders shifted uneasily, outnumbered and outshouted. Mary's husband snarled, rage, twisting his features. He looked from her to Jonathan, bloodied but unbroken, rifle steady despite the wound. The man's lips curled in defeat. "This isn't over, Hespat. You'll regret crossing me." But his voice lacked conviction. He yanked his reins, wheeled his horse, and spurred off. Her father followed, casting one last glare before disappearing into dust. The remaining riders fled after them, leaving silence behind. Mary stood trembling in the yard, fists clenched, heart pounding like a drum. Jonathan lowered his rifle, breath ragged, arm bleeding freely. The crowd at the fence began to disperse, murmurs of approval drifting through the air. Some tipped their hats to Mary as they left, respect in their eyes. Then she felt Daniel's arms wrapped tight around her waist. "Mama," he whispered, voice thick with fear and relief. Mai's tears broke free. She knelt, holding him close, her body shaking with the force of what she had said, what she had dared to claim. Jonathan staggered closer, pain in his eyes but pride too. He met her gaze, and though his lips did not move, his eyes spoke the truth. "You are free." The ranch grew quiet again in the weeks that followed. Snow melted, giving way to spring grass and gentle winds. What had once been a place of tension became something warmer, steadier, like a wound knitting into scar tissue, stronger than before. Mary woke each morning to roosters and the laughter of a child. Daniel trailed her through the kitchen, carrying eggs in small hands, often dropping one, but smiling as she praised his effort. He no longer scowled when she set food before him. Instead, he grinned, calling out, "Ma, look!" whenever he wanted her attention. The first time he spoke the word clearly, "Ma!" Mary froze. She turned, watching him run toward her with a carved toy horse in hand. The name left his lips without hesitation, natural as breath. Her knees buckled. She dropped to the floor, pulling him close, tears blurring her vision. Daniel laughed at her wet cheeks, pressing his small head against her chest. Jonathan watched from the doorway, his hands still dusted with earth. His face softened as he took in the sight. His son safe, a woman's joy overflowing. Later, when Daniel ran outside to chase chickens, Jonathan stepped into the kitchen. His voice was low, almost reverent. "You gave my boy a mother," he said, "and gave me back a reason to live." Mary met his gaze, her heart twisting. The man who once met her at the gate with cold eyes now looked at her as though she had saved him. That night the fire burned low, shadows dancing on the walls. Jonathan opened a drawer and drew out a small box worn smooth with age. Inside lay a silver ring, simple and dulled by years but polished with care. "This belonged to her," he said softly, "to Daniel's mother." Mary's breath caught. Jonathan's eyes did not waver. "I thought my heart had no room left for anyone else, but I was wrong. You have filled this house with life again. You've given Daniel back his laughter. And you?" His voice faltered, then steadied. "You've given me hope." He went down on one knee, firelight glinting off the band. "Mary, will you be me wife?" Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled. Not from sorrow or fear, but release of finally being chosen not as property or burden, but as a partner. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes." Jonathan slid the ring onto her finger. His hand lingered rough and warm before pulling her into his arms. For the first time, his embrace was not guarded. It was whole. The next morning, Mary stood before the small mirror. She had avoided her reflection for so long, afraid of what she might see. But sunlight streamed through the window, and she no longer saw a runaway bride or a frightened daughter bartered away. She saw a woman who had fought for freedom, a mother chosen by a child's love, a wife not forced, but embraced. Behind her, Jonathan's reflection appeared. Hess stepped close, his arm circling her waist, his chin brushing her hair. Together they looked into the glass, not at scars of the past, but at the family they had become. Mary rested her hand over his. "This is the life I never dreamed I could have." Jonathan kissed her temple, his words both vow and promise, "and it is yours always." Daniel's laughter rang out from the yard, bright and unbroken. Mary smiled through her tears, leaning back against Jonathan, feeling his strength, his warmth. At last she was not alone. At last she belonged. And in that cabin on the frontier, 3 hearts, scarred, stubborn, and strong, beat together as one family. On a land where women were bartered and men carried scars like shadows, Mary found not chains, but freedom. Jonathan found not loss, but hope. And Daniel, once broken by silence, found his laughter again. This wasn't just survival. This was love chosen, fought for, and won. Tell us in the comments what part of Mary and Jonathan's journey moved you the most. And hit that like button to hype this story. Subscribe to Legends of the Wild West Love Stories. Ring the bell so you never miss another tale of love, loss, and redemption on the frontier. Because under the endless sky, one truth always remains. Love finds a way.